Okay, welcome to the tutorial on the carburetor rebuild. So go ahead and pull this out of your tote. And we're going to take the gaskets and all that stuff off. Just be careful and don't break anything. Fuel line and choke. Okay, so first thing we're going to do on this is we're going to go lefty-loosey the ratchet. We're going to take the float bowl off. So if you have a carburetor that just leaks fuel, your issue is more than likely in the float bowl. There's a flat washer here, and sometimes it comes out. There's a bowl gasket sitting in here, so sometimes that just falls out by tapping it, but this isn't going to happen. So if it's leaking from around the bowl, it's probably the bowl gasket. The other thing that can make it leak is the float's got a little rubber tip on it, and if that rubber tip goes bad, it doesn't seal up good inside there anymore. So those are pretty much your options. If you have no low speed or no high speed, the issue is typically deeper inside the carburetor. So I've pulled the following parts out so far: the float, and then the little float pin, float valve, float bowl, bolt that holds everything together, and a flat washer. There's another bolt on the side with a flat washer behind it, and that's just for draining the carburetor for winter time or what have you. So onto the carburetor. Most of these Honda and the knockoff carburetors work the same, so we'll take the main jet out. If you need to rejet the carburetor for high altitude, this is actually the part you're going to change. So you see how that jet doesn't quite come out of there. If you put your float pin in there and push on it, and gently turn, usually it starts coming out. It's kind of hard to grab sometimes. So this is actually the high altitude jet right there. It's just this little drilled piece of brass. So I looked through it and flush it out with some carburetor cleaner both ways. I wouldn't recommend running a piece of wire through it because it's a really small orifice. We'll set that aside. Inside the carburetor is the emulsion tube, and a lot of times if you leave bad gas in it, these get plugged up. So I get a wire brush and kind of clean those out, and carburetor cleaner, you're going to have to be really careful on the little holes and not to make them bigger than they are or anything like that. Gas should be able to flow straight up through this, and this is typically the part that gets encrusted if the high speed isn't working correctly. On the low speed, bring the camera in a little bit more here. On the low speed side, you can see these little holes. Those are typically what plug up when the low speed jet isn't functioning correctly, or you have no low speed operation and always wants to die on you. So there's another screw where they drilled those passages. So I get a carburetor cleaner and bend the end of the straw and kind of wedge it up against the throttle plate and flow those backwards. Usually cleans them out. There's a Phillips screw here on the side, and I have the wrong screwdriver, so I'm going to need to break and get a Phillips here real quick. Okay, we're back with the right tool. Anyway, if I look in here and take this Phillips screw out, and inside of it is an orifice that oftentimes gets plugged full of dirt. You can kind of get a little bit better view of it on the camera there. So that guy actually ends up down here. It's got a BB in the end of it. You can't take the BB out, but he ties in with the emulsion tube and such. So if I flush carburetor cleaner through the top, it comes out through the bottom. If I flush it up through the bottom, it's going to come out this hole, and then you can kind of get the idea. Over here is a Welch plug, and that's where they drilled straight through to make the 3 little holes. So you have to buy the carburetor rebuild kit if you take the Welch plug out, but I've never really had to do that. I haven't really had them that badly plugged or anything like that. So lastly, depending on the revision of this carburetor that you have, you can have an idle speed adjustment or an idle mixture adjustment screw here. Maybe it's over here. It just depends on the type of carburetor. Mine doesn't have it. But some you can remove that screw all the way and you can flush out the low speed mixture. Some you can't, so just be aware of that. Usually if you just turn it and a little bit, play with it, it kind of dislodges any crap that's built up in it. So anyway, at this point, you need to get an instructor signature for the parts that you have. I'm just kind of gonna lay those out. Hopefully the camera can see those. Get everything cleaned up real nice. And then let's go ahead and start reassembling the carburetor. Okay, reassembling the carburetor is pretty much the reverse of how it came apart. So I'm gonna start by putting this Phillips screw back in. Okay, you don't have to force it or anything like that. Next thing we're going to take a look at is putting the emulsion tube in. It is directional. There's a long end and a short end with a bigger hole in it. That's actually going to need to go in first. So when that's done, you're going to put your high-speed jet in. Just be very careful not to cross-thread it. It's really easy to do. And you don't have to force it down or anything like that. You know it's in right when you look down inside the carburetor. And you can see the end of the emulsion tube. It's the brass piece there. And it's not flopping around in there. And your jet, there's a little ring down inside of it. You can kind of see the end of the jet's pretty much flush with that. So that tells you you got that put together right. So the next step is going to be to put the float and the needle together, and the valve rather. So I hook it into the float first, and then I bring the carburetor up to it, and then I put the pin in it, lift up on it. I'm not going to go through setting the float height on this. It's kind of hard to do with a plastic float. Haven't encountered one that I need to readjust yet. So when you put the float bowl on, this fiber washer on the right way, it's kind of got an angle bevel on it. All right, anyway, taking a look at that fuel drain one more time. So this is kind of the direction the carburetor sits on the mower. Maybe the fuel drain should face that way. Customer can drain it toward the end of the year, kind of. Anyway, now we'll go ahead and tighten that up, just a 10 millimeter. Should be able to tighten it by hand and have the float bowl not be trying to turn on you. If you have to put any amount of tension on it to keep that float bowl from turning, your main jet's probably not threaded in correctly, or it's cross-threaded, something like that. So that is the carburetor rebuild. Lastly, if you need parts for it, there's a number. Kind of get that into the camera. It's the BB series, and then this 5AWUA10 is the model. So there's many different carburetors for this engine, and you want to make sure you get the right parts for the one that you have for your engine.